Shalom and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this programme today we'll be discussing the latest developments regarding Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza. This week marked the 100th day anniversary since the Israeli incursion into Gaza to destroy Hamas, and we'll also be discussing how the International Criminal Court are trying to claim that Israel is committing war crimes. Warm welcome to the programme, and today we're joined by old good friends of the Middle East Report. They need no introduction. I'm joined by Hugh Kitson, who is a documentary filmmaker, produced the excellent documentary Whose Land, and Len Grates, who's the operational director for the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, UK, or ICEJUK for short. So gentlemen, welcome to the Middle East Report. I'll start off with you, Hugh. On Sunday marked the 100th days since the IDF launched its war against Hamas in Gaza, and of course the aftermath of that was the death and destruction caused by Hamas on the 7th of October, the likes of which we have not seen for over 80 years in the Holocaust. What are your thoughts as we mark 100 days since the IDF launched its military operation into Gaza?
Well, it's a long war. It's actually the longest war since the War of Independence. That went for a bit over a year, but it's the longest war that Israel has been involved with since then. And really, I can't see that it's going to be over quickly at all. It's been an absolute sea change in Israel, and although I've not been to Israel since October, from everything I read and people I talk to, the country is still absolutely reeling from the whole thing of October the 7th. And it was bound to happen sooner or later. I think the way things were going, the anti-Israel hatred certainly in the Islamic world, much of it anyway, it was just bound to happen sooner or later.
And Len, it's great to see you on the Middle East Report. But share with us how the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, UK, or ICEJUK for short, has really responded to the attacks on Israel by Hamas since October the 7th and also its aftermath.
Well, the president of the ICJ in Jerusalem, Dr. Jürgen Bühler, said to the whole staff and to the branches worldwide, he says, Israel's on a war footing and we must be also. And it's been amazing to see the Christian response during this terrible time. Just recently the ICJ purchased 4 ambulances. We've been helping those who've been relocated. There's over 100,000 people moved out of their homes in the last months. Besides the frontline war, there's this terrible confusion and disruption going on in the land. So we've been trying to address that. We've been trying to help get food, nice food to the soldiers on the front line, as well as things like stab vests and safety helmets, as well as working with quite a few different agencies, Zaka, just helping them with their psychological challenges. So there's a whole spectrum of activities going on, and it's been a blessing to see the response from the UK. We've just recently sent out over £100,000 from the UK branch, and thank you for your generosity, and please keep giving because the needs are so great. So we're just trying to address needs as they come, and we're being overwhelmed with requests, as you can imagine.
That's amazing. And of course we can watch Jerusalem Dispatch, which is on Monday night, the first Monday night of every month between 7 and 8 p.m. Great. And Hugh, I believe last week that you attended the screening of the horrors that occurred on October the 7th against those Israeli communities on the next to the Gaza Strip that were so defied and destroyed, and the massacres that took place by Hamas. It was organised by the Israeli embassy in London. Just share with your thoughts on what you saw and the importance as a film producer to understand the truth of actually what occurred.
Well, in some ways, I think that the footage, I mean, it's absolutely gruesome. It really is. And I had seen some of it before because some of it's been available on the internet. But in some ways, as horrible as this whole incident was, I believe it's a blessing that we have this footage, because there are people who are already denying that it ever happened. Now, I have to say that I've seen this sort of thing before. As you know, I've made a number of documentaries about Israel over the years. In fact, my first ever visit to Israel was exactly 50 years ago this month, just after the Yom Kippur War. And the country was absolutely reeling from that at the time. But there have been similar massacres, like the Hebron massacre of 1929, and I've seen similar pictures to some degree, even though the death toll was much lower. And then again in 1948, for instance, when Kfar Etzion was overrun the day before Independence Day, the Arabs who were doing that, who overran the place, they just simply massacred everyone. So this seems to be something that's connected with, dare I say it, fundamentalist radical Islam.
And Len, you also at the screening at the Israeli embassy. Sadly, I couldn't be there because it was on my main recording day, which is a Tuesday, and then they moved the times of the screening, which made it almost impossible. But I would have liked to have gone there, however difficult it was. But how important is it that you saw the actual video footage yourself? Many of it was actually taken from cameras that were actually on the Hamas terrorists themselves, and many of it was also CCTV footage that they showed as well. So just reflect on how important it is to actually see that to counter the lies that we're seeing, particularly from people, as Hugh was saying, that don't actually believe that October the 7th happened, or worse, and I've heard this said to my face, that what happened is that Hamas carried a smaller attack, only took a few hostages, but it was essentially the IDF that destroyed those kibbutzim and also those who attended the Nova music festival as well, and this wasn't done by Israeli forces. And then all the images we're seeing has all been generated by AI technology.
Well, I happened to be sitting next to Hugh at the event. There were about 20 people, 25 people there, a number of Christian leaders. And the ambassador addressed us, Ambassador Hotoveli, and she said quite clearly, she said, we need you to be witnesses, because there is a growing movement of deniers who are trying to undermine Israel's right to defend itself. It was one of the most horrific things I've ever witnessed, and it was hard to digest. I was not looking forward to it at all. It was the one, normally you are very happy to be invited to the Israeli embassy, but on this occasion, I had to certainly pray about, just making sure I was ready for what I was going to see. And it was truly horrific. But I can say, as with Hugh and many others, that this really did happen, and we only saw the tip of the iceberg. And I'm sure they withheld an awful lot worse videos. The videos, as you rightly pointed out, Simon, were filmed by Hamas themselves, also by first responders, those who turned up on the scene and discovered these atrocities, these horrific events. I recall vividly the first responder to the music festival, and he was just shouting out, "Is anyone alive? Is anyone alive?" and he was surrounded by dead young people who had been slaughtered. And you could hear the pain in his voice as he was just trying to find somebody alive. You know, even talking about it affects me even now. You know, it was just so horrific. And you know, I came away thinking, how can humanity stoop to such depths of depravity in order to do these acts of violence? Without thinking about it and rejoicing in it, and the one word or the two words that came out in my mind was this cry, Allah Akbar, Allah Akbar, praise God, and I thought, where is God? Where, you know? But this is what's behind it, as Hugh rightfully said. You know, we've got to be aware that there's a spiritual battle going on as well as a physical battle, and it has to do, unfortunately, with Islam, with radical Islam.
Yeah. And Phil, Hugh, as a documentary filmmaker, you are very, very much aware of the whole sphere of propaganda and the battle for truth, particularly by our mainstream media's coverage of this conflict, but also so much material that's actually then put out on social media that's really having a big impact on the younger generation. Just share with us really how much of a battle of truth we're actually in right now to actually just tell the truth of Israel's cause, which is they have every right to act in self-defense to destroy the terrorists who carried out the worst massacre that we've seen since the Holocaust against the Jewish people.
I think it's becoming increasingly more difficult, and as Len has said, it is a spiritual battle, because virtually every accusation, I'm not saying that Israel's perfect in everything they do, but as our good friend Richard Kemp has often said in front of the UN Human Rights Council, that the IDF is the most moral army in the world. And what is driving all of this propaganda is lies. It's like the 1930s all over again. It was Goebbels, Joseph Goebbels, who said that if a lie is repeated often enough, the people will believe it. And this is exactly what is going on. It's lies, lies, lies. And sadly, so few people know the truth that the falsehoods are overrunning the lies. And so part of my calling as a documentary filmmaker, and I'm more of your traditional documentary maker than into social media as such. There are plenty of people who can do social media and understand it much better than me. But the story needs to be told and needs to be built of the truth of Israel's right to exist and live in peace in her ancient homeland. And so that is something to be got across, I believe. And sadly, the Jewish community themselves, because the education sometimes in Israel is not what it could be, they don't really necessarily understand themselves. Only a few do.
And Len, you attended the pro-Israel rally that took place in Trafalgar Square on Sunday, which was the 14th of January. Share what that was like, particularly if you then compare it to the previous day with the Palestinian rallies and demonstrations taking place.
You know, at the end of the day, somebody asked me that question, what was it like? And I said it was peaceful, it was prayerful, and it was representing a broken people. There was that sense of brokenness amongst the crowd. There was no anger. There was nobody shouting for retribution or addressing any of the previous day's events. There was just a declaration that Israel will live, and will live beyond this war. And it was a great privilege to be there. I always, find it's an amazing privilege. It's a historic event. You know, this is 25,000 people in Trafalgar Square, and I happened to be invited into the VIP section of the crowd, which was a great privilege. And it was so encouraging to see some senior politicians there and senior members of the Jewish community. Here's Suella Braverman here with her son, and she was talking to the crowd. You know, I was able to just say thank you to her, and you know, and it was just a very holy event. And we had this moment when we kept silent for 100 seconds, representing the 100 days, because this was the remembrance of the 100th day. And you know, you could hear a pin drop. You know, there weren't shouts for jihad, there weren't shouts for, you know, let's get even. There was just a quiet, holy hush that was, which everyone honored. And of course, we remembered those who are still hostages, 134 now. There was 136 on Sunday, and 2 since then have been found dead. So we need to keep praying for these remaining hostages and children. What the youngest child, it was his first birthday just in these past couple of days. So it was a great honor to be there, but you could feel the pain, you could sense the pain, even with the British Jewish community.
So let's now look at this excellent CBN news report put together by our friends at CBN entitled Defence Minister Gallant, Israel's future depends on the war's outcome in Gaza.
Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant says the intensive fighting in the northern Gaza Strip has ended and will also be over soon in the city of Khan Yunis in southern Gaza. But the Israeli military will keep attacking to eliminate Hamas capabilities and return the hostages home.
The cruel enemy before us understands only force. If the fire stops, the fate of the abductees will be sealed for many years in the captivity of Hamas. Without military pressure, no one will talk to us. Without military pressure, we will not be able to reach any agreements. Only from a position of strength can the abductees be freed.
Hamas launched dozens of rockets at southern Israeli communities on Tuesday, causing some damage. Hamas marked 100 days of war by releasing videos about 3 hostages, Itai Sversky, Yossi Sharabi, and Noah Argamani, whose mother has brain cancer and recently appealed for the release of her daughter so she can see her before she dies.
26-year-old Noah Argamani was with her friends celebrating peace at the Nova Music Festival before being seized by Hamas. The image of Noah on the back of a motorcycle, surrounded by Hamas terrorists, crying out for help, shook the world.
First came a video of 3 captives, then a guessing game, followed by another video with one of the 3 hostages explaining that the other 2 were killed by Israeli fire.
Hamas is weaponizing social media as an instrument of war. Hamas wages psychological warfare to terrorize and torment the hostages, their families, and the world.
Israel says Hamas is lying about the idea of targeting the buildings where the hostages were held, but did notify the families of the 2 men that it has concerns about their well-being. Inside Israel, 2 terrorists who were working at an Israeli car wash illegally carried out multiple stabbing and car ramming attacks on Monday in the city of Ra'anana near Tel Aviv. 1 woman was killed and 17 others injured, including children, in the terror attacks, as Israel's cabinet continues to debate whether or not to allow West Bank Palestinians into the country to work. On the northern front, Israel struck Hezbollah targets on Monday. Earlier, a Hezbollah rocket made a direct hit on a home in an agricultural community along the border, killing 2 Israelis. Iranian-backed groups continue to use the Gaza war as an excuse to carry out attacks in the region. Sources said the Iranian Revolutionary Guards launched ballistic missiles that hit an upscale area in Erbil, Iraq, near the U.S. consulate. 4 civilians were reportedly killed and 6 injured. Iran announced it had launched strikes against what it called an Israeli spy headquarters and the gathering of anti-Iranian terrorist groups. Earlier, Houthi rebels fired a missile at a U.S.-owned ship off the coast of Yemen less than a day after they launched an anti-ship cruise missile at an American destroyer in the Red Sea.
The Yemeni armed forces consider all American and British ships and warships participating in the aggression against our country as hostile targets.
For now, Israel's main focus remains on the war against Hamas in Gaza, with the goal of wiping out their terrorist capability to keep Israel safe in the future. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thanks to our friends at CBN there for keeping us up to date regarding the latest developments regarding Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza and the regional developments taking place in its aftermath. Hugh, we've reached a landmark this week on Sunday, being the 100th days since the Israelis launched their military operation against Hamas in Gaza. Share with us the importance of Israel to actually complete and finish their military objectives and to ignore pressure even from the Biden administration and also from our own Foreign Secretary David Cameron to call for a ceasefire.
Well, I think it's absolutely essential that the IDF finish the job. I don't know whether you saw it in that clip, but there was a shot of the Houthis doing a Nazi salute like that. And what we're seeing is a war by Islamo-fascists in the Middle East with one goal, and that is to destroy Israel. And Hamas has been a thorn in the side of Israel really since it was founded in 1987. And they have to be destroyed. But I'm afraid also Hezbollah has to be destroyed and the Iranian regime need to be brought down, because the Iranians are behind this whole thing, and I think we all know that. And in one sense, certainly Iran was behind what happened on October the 7th, although I believe actually what happened was that Hamas jumped the gun. It was going to be a concerted attack by Hamas and Hezbollah all at once. And Hamas's goal was to go to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The code name is the Al-Aqsa Flood for this operation from their point of view. And two things happened, which I believe was the Lord's protection on Israel. One, Hezbollah were caught by surprise and didn't join the war, although they're doing a war of attrition as we speak. Whether they come in full scale later remains to be seen. But it was a mercy that they didn't, because otherwise Hamas may well, with all the rockets coming in from the north, may well have succeeded in getting to Jerusalem.
I don't know if they would have got to Jerusalem, but they certainly would have done a lot of damage. There's speculation that what we saw happen in southern Israel would be magnified tenfold in the north. So Absolutely. We're talking about maybe hundreds of thousands of people injured and killed and taken hostage. So so praise God that didn't happen. But I just need to correct you on this one. Hamas was formed between 1987 and 1988.
But I was not saying...
You said 97.
Oh, 97. I beg your pardon.
Need to be, just getting historical facts right.
Sure.
Len, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has actually vowed that he will do everything within his power as the Prime Minister and with the deployment of the IDF in Gaza to eliminate and destroy Hamas, this genocidal terrorist organisation. Share with us the importance of Israel needing to restore her deterrent capabilities and also sending a lesson to other terrorists in the region like Hezbollah and other Palestinian factions that want to attack Israel, the consequences of doing so.
Netanyahu and the Israeli people are fed up with these constant attacks from Hamas in particular over recent years and Hezbollah, who are threatening it all the time. And I think their determination now is to say enough is enough. You've been sending rockets over, thousands of rockets, and we've done very little in response, maybe an air raid or something like that. But they've come to the point where they've said, that's it. we've got to eliminate Hamas once and for all. Otherwise, they will do it again. And they're still at it. They're still doing it, even though they're being reduced in numbers on a daily basis. And of course, the latest reports are from the IDF that they've more or less finished their work in the north of Gaza, and they're finishing off in the middle, in the central section, but they're now going down to the south to Khan Yunis and the Rafah. There's a big congregation of Hamas terrorists in that region. They've moved there from the north. And I believe that the IDF will continue their operation to eliminate Hamas completely, and to destroy the tunnels, to destroy their arsenal, and it will never be the same again. We're looking at a Middle East that will never be the same as it was before October the 7th. Israel are determined to secure their borders and to protect the Israeli people themselves.
Absolutely. So let's have a look now at this excellent video that shows the connection between Hamas and their Iranian paymasters, and this is courtesy of the Israeli Defense Force.
What's the connection between the Iranian regime and Hamas in Gaza? Iran and Hamas's partnership began in the 90s when the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps taught Hamas officials how to build and use suicide belts to kill Israelis throughout the first and second intifadas. As Hamas gained prominence as a terrorist organization, Iran began sending them $50 million a year. After Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005, Hamas started sending their fighters to Iran for training in field tactics and weapons technology. In 2008, Hamas upgraded their homemade short-range rockets to Iranian-made Grad rockets that enabled them to hit Israeli cities over 20 miles away from Gaza for the first time. By the next escalation in 2012, Hamas was launching long-range Iranian Fajr 5 rockets at Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. In 2014, Iran was caught shipping weapons directly to Hamas in Gaza on the infamous Class C. On board were 40 Syrian-made rockets, 181 mortar shells, and about 400,000 bullets, all hidden among bags of cement and clearly marked with Iranian labels. In addition to using ships, Iran also regularly smuggled weapons to Hamas on cargo planes, trucks, and through Hamas's underground tunnel system. Operation Protective Edge saw Hamas continuing to fire Iranian-made rockets at Israel, as well as Hamas's debut of drones and UAVs that originated in Iran. Over the next several years, Hamas continued to develop three main types of drones based on the Iranian Sarir 110: drones for reconnaissance, drones for dropping explosives, and suicide drones. In 2017, Iran upped its support for Hamas to about $100 million a year. And as smuggling became more difficult, Iran began training Hamas to produce high-quality weapons locally, the teach a man to fish strategy. Members of Hamas's Nukhba Special Forces unit traveled to Iran for training by the IRGC and returned to Gaza to train others. After 11 days of non-stop rocket attacks across Israel in 2021, unprecedented in quantity and in range, Hamas leaders publicly thanked Iran once again for helping them build up their massive arsenal. And finally, just weeks before Hamas's invasion of Israel and massacre on October 7th, 2023, hundreds of Hamas terrorists received special training in Iran. The drones that Hamas built with Iranian help played a key role in the early hours of their invasion. Iran had recently increased their funding to a whopping $350 million. Hamas has been terrorizing millions of Israeli civilians for 36 years, and their rule over Gaza has enabled Iran to maintain a presence directly on Israel's border. The Hamas-Iran alliance is just one part of Iran's axis of terror and ongoing attempts to destabilize the Western world.
The excellent video was courtesy of our friends from the IDF, and we very much appreciate their use in showing it, highlighting the link between Hamas and Iran. What is interesting, I remember having a conversation with Melanie Phillips going back in about 2006. I was talking about this alliance between Hamas and Sunni terrorist organizations and that of the Iranian regime. She said this is impossible. They hate each other. Iran is Shia and Hamas and Al-Qaeda are Sunni. they hate each other. But we see that it doesn't matter with the Iranians. As long as they work in their strategic interests of defending Iranian interests, but also carrying out terror attacks as Hamas has done, they're willing to give Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and any other Palestinian terrorist entity money to carry out attacks against Israel. Your thoughts?
Yes, it is amazing because it is well known that Shia and Sunni Muslims hate each other, but they hate Israel even more, and they hate the West as well, and Western culture, and especially the Judeo-Christian ethic in the West. And what I find so astonishing is that we're asleep. The West basically is asleep about the whole thing, and the Biden regime or administration, we could call it a regime, I guess, the Biden administration is actually encouraging this. We've seen the Houthis in recent times targeting merchant vessels in the Red Sea and around the Gulf of Aden there. And it really should be a question of both the Americans and the British and other nations whose shipping is affected of really getting stuck into the Iranian regime, giving them an ultimatum: either they stop the Houthis or we'll go to war. And the Biden regime is weak, it's hopeless. Oh, we don't want to escalate things. I'm afraid we're dealing with a very similar situation that we had in the 1930s with Adolf Hitler and the whole Nazi intention, only with radical fundamentalist Islam. There's a messianic, and I'm not talking about Yeshua here, I'm talking about Satan. There's almost a messianic drive, spiritual drive behind this whole thing. And I believe actually it's far more dangerous than Hitler was back in the 1930s. And it's time we in the West woke up to it.
No, absolutely. Effectively, we've been at war. Well, the Iranian regime has been at war with Britain and with Israel and the United States ever since they overthrew the Shah back in 1979. Their fingerprints are on 9/11. Their fingerprints are on Lockerbie. So it's only a question of time, really, before we are engaged in a military conflict with the Iranian regime. Len, as we mark 100 days from the start of Israel's war against Hamas, and you mentioned it earlier in the program, just share with us the importance of keeping the remaining Israeli hostages who we don't know their conditions, we don't know if they're alive or they're dead, we know that a few of them are, but it's imperative, isn't it, we continue to pray for those hostages, particularly the poor baby who's now marked his first anniversary in Hamas's captivity in Gaza.
You'll hear in the narrative from the Israeli government that this war is not just about pursuing Hamas and destroying Hamas, but in finding the hostages. And Israel will find these hostages. And obviously we're all praying that they're still alive. But every life, every single life, every individual life is very precious in Jewish ideology. It's, there's a film in the cinemas at the moment called One Life, which is about Nicholas Winton, who quotes an Israeli proverb that says that whoever saves one life saves the world. And that is very much part of the Israeli and Jewish psyche. It's part of their makeup that life is important, and they will find these, they will. We're praying that they're still alive, and we should be praying that as well, that God will protect them, release them, direct the IDF to find them, and that they'll be able to be reunited with their family. So please pray. There is an initiative about writing the hostages' names on your hand. As the Lord says about us, He's written His name on our name on His hand, and to be able to remember and pray for these dear ones.
Absolutely. So let's have a look at another excellent video produced, this time by the Israeli Foreign Ministry. And this one is that Israel will continue to comply with the international humanitarian laws.
In an attempt to demonize Israel, South Africa has taken a controversial stance. Bringing forth absurd accusations against Israel, South Africa seems to have forgotten a crucial detail: its own questionable alliances. While South Africa claims to champion justice, its silence on Palestinian suffering in Syria and the actions of Hamas raises eyebrows. October 7th, a tragic day during which Hamas killed the largest number of Jews in a single day since the Holocaust. Instead of standing in solidarity with the Israeli victims, South Africa reached out to congratulate Hamas leaders, blaming Israel while it was still mourning. But is this about genuine humanitarian concerns for the Palestinians, or a calculated attempt to strip Israel of its right to self-defense and obligation to defend its citizens? South Africa's move raises questions. Is it really about justice, or a cynical effort to weaponize a term with a painful history in an attempt to demonize the state of Israel? Israel will defend its citizens while continuing to comply with the international humanitarian law.
And that was thanks to our friends at the Israeli Foreign Ministry. What a strange world we're living in. Israel was attacked on October the 7th, the worst mass terrorist attack to occur since the foundation of the modern state of Israel. And we haven't seen this number of Jewish people massacred in one day since the Holocaust. Over 1,400 Israelis were murdered in cold blood by Hamas. And yet we see the International Criminal Court, we see that South Africa is claiming that Israel's committing a genocide in Gaza when the real genocide took place on October the 7th, and yet they're silent. It just makes you think now that we see over the last couple of weeks big news discussions on the fact that South Africa as a government has taken Israel to the International Criminal Court for alleged war crimes. What are your thoughts on this outrageous accusations made by the government of South Africa?
Well, it's actually the International Court of Justice rather than the International Criminal Court. That may well come later when various people try to prosecute Israeli leaders and military leaders and political leaders. But the ICEJ, mustn't get confused there, the International Court of Justice, this is the second time that Israel has been brought up against the International Court of Justice. And on this occasion, the South African government have totally fabricated this whole business of genocide. Israel is actually a signatory to the Genocide Convention, which is why she's been forced into court. And there's another case, which we won't talk about now, in the International Court of Justice, where Israel is having to defend itself. But in this particular incident, I saw some of the first day when the South African lawyers were putting their case, and really it was lie after lie after lie. And I also saw some of the Israel defense. My prayer, and this is actually spiritual warfare, my prayer is that the judges will actually come out with the true, just verdict on this. Whether that happens is another matter, because when Israel built their security barrier, the whole case against Israel was basically fabricated, and we may well see that again. Now, this judgment, whatever they come out with, is actually legally binding. A similar thing happened 2 years ago after Russia invaded Ukraine, and Russia basically just simply ignored the court's verdict on this. So I'd hate to, it won't do Israel any good to do what Russia did. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. And Len, share with us the awful agenda being pursued by the government of South Africa, who appears to have close connection with Hamas and are certainly doing their bidding and trying to then bring these false and outrageous accusations that Israel is committing war crimes in Gaza.
You know, I think it's a very interesting situation what's happening there in South Africa. I was reading an article this week that said that the ANC, which is the ruling party of South Africa, was nearing bankruptcy. And of course, if it went into bankruptcy, it wouldn't be able to stand in the elections later this year. And so they did a deal with Iran, and Iran basically bailed them out and saved them from bankruptcy. But in some strange way, it seems that South Africa is willing to sell its soul to the highest bidder. And in this case, it's Iran, who have then put pressure on the South African government to recognize Hamas. You know, within days of this event in October, Hamas visited South Africa. They've had the foreign minister from Iran visit there, and Iran is investing heavily in South Africa at this moment in time, and it's to try and keep the ANC alive. And of course, the ANC has strong tendencies to support both Hamas and Hezbollah against international pressure, because I know the UK government's been putting pressure on them, saying, listen, you've got to recognize these are terrorist organizations, but they just seem to be interested in just survival mode at the moment, and they're selling themselves out to Iran. That's one of the things that's happening right now.
Which is very dangerous. So let's have a look now at this excellent news report from our friends at CBN. This one's entitled "The ICC Threatens to Charge Israel with War Crimes."
The International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor Karim Khan has warned that he's considering war crimes charges over Israel's conduct of the war and its blockade of supplies into Gaza.
I have to say that Israel has clear obligations in relation to its war with Hamas. Not just moral obligations, but legal obligations to comply with the laws of armed conflict.
The United Nations is also collecting evidence, saying Israel may be committing the crime of collective punishment with its siege.
We want the International Criminal Court to hold Netanyahu accountable for the war crimes and the crimes against humanity that Israel is committing.
First of all, nations are not charged with war crimes, individuals are. And those charges don't come after weeks, but in most cases after many years of investigation. The International Criminal Court would also have to prove Israeli officials willfully tried to kill civilians or cause suffering. Jeffrey Korn, former U.S. Army senior advisor on law of war issues, currently leads the Center for Military Law and Policy at Texas Tech University. He says war crimes are not committed simply because civilians die, but how and why they die.
We don't define a war crime in an attack by what occurs. We define a war crime in an attack by the decision to launch the attack. So it's a conduct-based equation, not a result-based equation. And so when we look at the images of destruction and civilian suffering in war, and we jump to the conclusion that that must be a war crime, that's like saying 1 + I don't know equals war crime.
The Israeli Defense Forces Code of Ethics sets a very high bar, stating, "Every human being is of value, regardless of his or her origin, religion, nationality, gender, status, or position. The IDF servicemen and women will act in a judicious and safe manner in all they do, out of recognition of the supreme value of human life." Andrew Tucker is an expert in international law in The Hague, Netherlands.
That doesn't mean Israel doesn't make mistakes. It doesn't mean Israel doesn't do wrong things. It simply means that in terms of process, in terms of decision-making, it's, I think, indisputable that Israel holds itself to the highest moral and legal standards.
Some of those who want Israelis charged for war crimes are very upset with Karim Khan for not having already issued arrest warrants, with the anti-Israel BDS movement branding Khan a genocide enabler. But some believe it's all but assured Israelis will be charged, with so many international agencies, including the United Nations, aligned against Israel.
Most Israeli military leaders know that no matter how hard they try to actually and comply with the law and do their best to deal with this difficult situation, they're going to be condemned.
Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Excellent report there put together by our friends at CBN. Hugh, I have to ask you that you have featured the issue of lawfare in so many of your recent documentaries, particularly linked to Whose Land, where Israel's enemies are using law as a weapon against Israel to demonize Israel in the court of public opinion and erode Israel's moral ability to defend herself and that of the IDF. Just share with us how Israel's enemies are particularly using this kind of warfare against Israel.
Well, in reality, what they're doing is actually distorting international law to try and make a case. And to give you one example that we highlight in part 2 of Whose Land, one of the episodes there, is the fact that the invasion of Jordan in 1948 was illegal. It was backed by Britain, by the way. And therefore, when they annexed what they renamed as the West Bank, that's Judea and Samaria, and Jerusalem, they were committing an illegal act. Now, there's a principle of international law called ex injuria jus non oritur, if I'm not right.
That's impressive.
It's quite, Natasha Hausdorff talks about it too. Now, an illegal act cannot be a basis for a legal claim or establish a legal, for instance, sovereignty. So Jordan's sovereignty over what was then called the West Bank under international law had no basis whatsoever. And you get all these UN resolutions that try and turn this over, like Resolution 2334 in the dying days of the Obama regime. If you look at the actual principles of international law, then Israel has every right of sovereignty and domicile in all of what the Jordanians called the West Bank. By the way, when the Jordanians renounced their sovereign claim to the West Bank in 1988 in favor of the PLO, what they were effectively doing was handing over stolen property.
No, interesting. We need to ponder that and to think a lot more on that one. So thank you for that one, Hugh. And Len, we're in a ridiculous situation, aren't we? The fact that here 1,400 Israelis were murdered on October the 7th. Between 6,000 and 7,000 were injured, and many of those in a critical condition. Over 240 hostages taken hostage to Gaza, and you've seen the footage that Hamas actually carried out massacres, which translates as a war crime and crimes against humanity on October the 7th. Israel, as a sovereign state, is defending herself from this terrorist organisation that wants her destruction and is committed to genocide. And there we have Israel having to fight an extremely difficult war in a very dense population in Gaza, where Hamas use asymmetrical warfare. They use women, they use children, even hostages as human shields. They they dress like civilians so they don't get targeted, and they deliberately kill their own people. And yet South Africa and the International Criminal Court are blaming Israel for war crimes.
Well, I think it just shows you just how crazy the world's come, and how how biased press is, and you know, if we ever wanted proof for a general anti-Israel position by nations and by the media in particular, then that you've just listed those the proof. You know, it's just Netanyahu says the world's turned upside down. And I think he's spot on there. You know, that the world's gone crazy, and it just can't see and discern what is really going on. And I think that it proves again about this inbred prejudice against the Jewish people and the Israeli state. How and the only explanation I can give for it is spiritual, because it doesn't make sense. You know, why is the world turning against a country the size of Wales, you know, with 6 million Jews, 8 million population altogether, including the Arabs? What's the big deal? You know, the only deal is that these people are called the chosen people, the people of God, and it's that spiritual force that's behind the destruction of the people of God that we're seeing before our very eyes. There's no other logical explanation for me as a believer.
Absolutely. So let's have a look now at another video produced by the Israeli Foreign Ministry, and this is in the International Court of Law, and you decide.
You be the judge. Israel is doing everything in its power to prevent harm to innocent civilians in Gaza and is acting according to international humanitarian law. Israel has been notifying all Gazans to evacuate to southern Gaza to a safe place with 70,000 phone calls, 14 million voice messages, and 7 million leaflets outlining evacuation plans. Hamas is violently denying its people passage by blocking roads and attacking them. You be the judge. Israel has opened escape routes for the population and is ensuring the safety of Gaza's residents while Hamas fires upon them. You be the judge. Israel has been facilitating the delivery of humanitarian aid to southern Gaza, but the vicious Hamas raids the assistance and even attacks the Palestinians in need of the aid. You be the judge. It's time to judge those who are genuinely responsible for what's happening in Gaza. The cruel terror organization, Hamas. You be the judge.
It's great to see the Israeli Foreign Ministry there really fighting against these false and outrageous accusations against Israel that they're committing war crimes. No one, particularly Israel, wants to be in Gaza. They don't want to send their soldiers to die. Over 190 soldiers have already died since October the 7th fighting against Hamas. Israel does not want to be in Gaza. Israel doesn't want to destroy people's homes, but when they're faced with an existential threat posed by Hamas, Israel has no other choice if the very state of Israel is to survive. And that's exactly, I mean, I'm going to mix up my questions if you don't mind, Hugh. So what do you make of the fact that the South African legal team is headed by Professor John Dugnut, who chaired a UN Commission on Human Rights Inquiry Committee, who has called Israel an apartheid state and has called for an arms embargo on Israel? So already we're seeing in the International Criminal Court that those who are investigating Israel for war crimes have already made up their mind before even any evidence is presented before them. And that is dangerous, isn't it?
Extremely dangerous, and it's not the first time it's happened. Back in 2003, 2004, when Israel was building its security barrier, it was the Egyptian ambassador in the UN who brought this action in the International Criminal Court against Israel, and he became one of the judges on the International Criminal Court to decide the case. Now, on that occasion, Israel did not recognize the jurisdiction, and so they didn't actually defend themselves, which is perhaps a little bit questionable, but a number of things came out of that. They decided that Israel could not defend herself against people from a territory that they were occupying. And the whole case was just simply corrupted.
Absolutely.
From the start.
Let's have a look now at Whose Land that looks at this issue to do with the legality of Israel's cause.
The International Court of Justice's conclusion was criticised by the dissenting judge, Judge Bergenthal, and he noted that the ICJ's opinion failed to address any facts or evidence. It's often said that the facts lie at the foundation of the law, and the law arises from the facts, ex facto jus oritur. And the court did not consider at all the wave of suicide bombings from infiltrating Palestinian terrorists, which Israel had suffered since September 2000. Now, the difficulty the court had in making a proper assessment of matters in the case of Israel's security barrier is that the court was presented with a raft of false information.
So how has this advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice in The Hague impacted Israel? Let me first say that Israel made the decision not to appear before the court to offer any defense for its course of action. This is because Israel questioned the jurisdiction of the court to pass judgment on this issue, as well as questioning the composition of the court itself and the parameters given by the UN General Assembly. From a public relations point of view, the International Court's opinion has not helped Israel's defense at all, even though its findings are unenforceable and carry no legal weight. From a legal perspective, the court's findings are deeply flawed.
Great to see that Hugh there, through whose land is actually fighting this legal action being taken against Israel, known as lawfare. Len, sum up. We've had a big discussion today on so many events surrounding Israel, the International Criminal Court marking 100 days of Israel's war against Hamas. How should Christians be praying, and how should they act in the face that we are defending the one and only Jewish state of Israel and God's covenant people?
Well, first and foremost, we need to be praying, consistently praying. You know, the ICEJ has a daily prayer meeting from 2 o'clock till 4 o'clock, international prayer meeting, praying for the situation. Join us in prayer, join in prayer with whoever. So it's important that we discover the power of prayer. We're not wrestling flesh and blood, but principalities and powers. Always remember that.
Amen. Len and Hugh, thank you so much for being my guests on this week's edition of the Middle East Report. And I want to thank you for watching home. We've got to continue to pray for Israel. We've got to continue to advocate the righteousness of Israel's cause. We have to confront the lies. And thank you for watching this week's edition of the Middle East Report.